So that whole freedom to design a life that reflects who we are now, most of our mums never had that, but we've got it. You decide who you want to be in the future, not just who you've been. Welcome to the Redefining Midlife podcast. I'm Jo Clark and I'm so glad you're here. And this is a podcast for women who are ready to break free from outdated stereotypes, rediscover themselves, and embrace the endless opportunities that midlife brings. Each week, I'll share expert advice, actionable strategies, and inspiring conversations with incredible women who are redefining what it means to thrive in midlife and beyond. From health and wellness to reigniting your purpose and passions, this is your go-to podcast for feeling empowered, supported, and seen. And midlife isn't the end. It's your time to shine, rewrite your story, and create a life that you truly love. So let's get started. Thank you so much for joining me today to listen to episode 129 of the Redefining Midlife podcast. And today I'm going to be answering a few more listener questions, just like I did a few episodes ago. And I had such lovely feedback from that episode. So thank you to everyone who sent me a DM on Instagram or sent me an email. And as I said in episode 126, even though every woman's experience in midlife is unique, there are just so many things that we all share in common. And that's why talking openly helps you to feel less alone. And perhaps you'll hear me share something today that you're also going to connect with. So we're going to start with a question from Hannah. And she said, I've been following you for a long time on Instagram. Thanks, Hannah. And it looks like travel is something that you like to do. So what do you enjoy so much about traveling, especially in this time of life? Yeah, actually, Hannah, your question is really super timely because when this episode is released, my husband and I are going to be enjoying or partway through a 17-day trip around the beautiful North Island of New Zealand. Traveling to new places has always been something that I've enjoyed ever since I went on my first big trip to Europe when I was about 23. And there's so much that I enjoy about traveling. There's that whole connection of travel and personal growth because travel, it really just isn't about seeing new places. It's about stepping out of your routine and getting out of your comfort zone. And that's why I think midlife is that perfect time to explore, whether it's just going a local getaway, you don't have to go overseas, or whether you do want to have a bigger overseas trip. And experiencing those different cultures and perspectives really does expand your view of what's actually possible. I absolutely love about meeting new people. I love to try new foods. And even though I'm not good at it, it is kind of fun trying to communicate in a different language if you're in a foreign speaking country. Uh, in our trip to France in 2023, I'm just thinking of an example of how travel is so important and what it can do. We actually met an absolutely gorgeous young Italian woman who was a sommelier and she was in the Champagne region of France. And we connected on a really lovely level and stayed in contact from that time. And she actually visited and stayed at our place with her best friend not so long ago. So these new connections and your friendships that can happen, they can span ages and continents. And it really is very, very special. So that's something else that I love about travel is meeting new people. And also in this stage of life, I think, travel really does teach you a lot of different lessons. One of the really powerful ones is that whole letting go of control because travel reminds us we can't plan for everything. And you learn a lot about yourself, especially when things don't go your way and, you run into some problems like getting lost or having your luggage left behind in a different country and you get off the plane hoping to find your luggage on the carousel and it's not there. So travel can really test your patience. And my husband and I always have that mindset that even though, the poo is hitting the fan at the moment and when it's happening, it always makes for a fun and a great story afterwards and a really special memory. Being in a new place actually even forces you to be present and really embrace that unknown. And what I love about travel is that I start to see and experience things with a real beginner's mind, which is kind of like, if you think about it, similar to what a child might be experiencing the first time that they see something or try something. And I think that's really important because that whole sense of adventure, curiosity, and play, they're sometimes the things that we forget as we go through life, particularly, in the busyness of midlife. And if I think about some personal stories of, travel that might have changed me and why I love it so much is back in would have been about 2016, my husband and I were lucky enough to travel to Spain to celebrate a friend's special birthday. And that really shifted a perspective that we had on something really important in our lives. And at that point, when we were back in 2016, we're at a point where we just, for whatever reason, started to question why we were waiting until our retirement age before we moved to our dream location. We were always going to perhaps travel and, well, not travel, but live in this particular location once we were much older and had retired. But we got to that point there and we thought, why the hell are we waiting? Because life is short. Why wait to enjoy it if we could enjoy it now? And that really was an absolutely huge aha moment for both of us. And luckily, we both felt the same. It would have been a bit trickier if one of us was only feeling that way. But when we got home, we put those wheels into motion and we actually moved in 2018. So that was a time where I'm sure if we hadn't traveled, we may not have reached that conclusion together at that point in time. We may have even waited a lot longer and our lives could look completely different. And also just think about you don't need to travel far to experience any magic of newness or discovery. So give yourself a little challenge. If you can't go on a big trip, and not everyone can, I get that, but just find a way to explore somewhere new this month. Even if it's a new local cafe in your area, the next town, maybe a park, just try somewhere different and do something different because it really will open up your eyes to something, a bit different to what you're normally used to. Now, in the second question, Marie asks, how do you learn to relax and be comfortable if you're not doing all the time? Oh, this is huge. Now, the conditioning of always do. And so many women in midlife struggle with slowing down because we have been conditioned to equate productivity with our worth. If you're busy, it's really important and you've got that sense of self-importance. And that's kind of attached, if you think about it that way, it's kind of attached to ego a bit, isn't it? And if you have a little experiment, and even either with yourself or with somebody else. So ask somebody how they are, or if somebody asks you how you are, quite often people will answer with the word, I'm busy. Or, yeah, good, thanks, but busy. It's almost that there's a need to say that you've been busy, as though, that's really important to add that little bit of information. The pressure that we have to always be achieving, helping, or ticking things off a list is huge. And we've got this whole culture and society and the messages that we get that really reinforce that idea that rest is something that's really indulgent rather than it actually being essential. And I think you get to the point when you run down in the middle of life or you're just overwhelmed that you realize just how important that rest is. And when you're always in that state of doing, you can't be in that whole state of simply being. And I'll speak for myself that it was one of my biggest problems, and I learnt the hard way. It's not sustainable. You can't always be in that rush mentality and the busyness of it all. So you've got to kind of unlearn the guilt around rest. Understand that rest is productive. It does so many things for us. It can just fuel creativity. It can improve your well-being out of sight. And it can give you that clarity of what is important for you and what you need, what your body needs, what you need. So shifting your whole mindset from I should be doing something to I deserve to stop and pause, that can make all the difference. And just letting go of that belief that busyness equals success or your value. It's not easy because it's something that we've probably been doing for decades and it's really encouraged. But there are lots of easy, practical ways that you can start relaxing without feeling lazy. If you feel a little bit, that whole sense of it's lazy or you're uncomfortable with the whole idea, just start to reframe relaxation as an intentional act of self-care. It's not that you're avoiding anything and you are not being lazy. It is an intentional act of self-care. It's good for you. Just it's good for you. So you can experiment with different ways to relax. What truly feels good versus with what you think you should be doing. So get rid of the shoulds and start to think about what really does feel good for you. And just start to incorporate tiny little micro rest moments. Like it mightn't be a huge rest. We're not talking about you're going to be lying down on your bed for an hour or half an hour. That might be the case. But if you don't have that luxury, which many don't, start to think about these tiny little moments that you can slip into your day. Just sit in silence for a few minutes. And if you can't manage a few minutes, then you've really got to question something in your life. Maybe when you're having a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, just sip mindfully. Don't just chug it down. Same when you're eating, just enjoy. Enjoy the mouthful of it and the taste of the food, the sensation of that in your mouth. Also take deep breaths between tasks. Just notice if you're going from one thing to the other. And quite often, we're holding our breath instead of letting go. Also, just think about setting boundaries with yourself and others, because this is something, again, that women in the middle of life, after years of teaching people how they or how you behave, just set that boundary that not everything needs an immediate response or action. Don't give yourself that sense of urgency. And I think I look at modern technology and that whole sense of urgency, and I am guilty of it myself. If a text comes up or a message comes up, I feel compelled that I have to answer immediately as though it's a life and death situation. And you know what? Most times, majority of times, it isn't. So set yourself boundaries. Things don't have to be done straight away. That work email doesn't really need to be done straight away. I think we've got to give ourselves those moments of grace. And also just realize that whole nervous system regulation that needs to happen. So in the middle of life, we know that you can have heightened feelings of stress because of what's going on. But we also know that the science behind slowing down and how it benefits our hormones, our brain, and our overall well-being is just huge. So you might like to have some simple ways to reset your nervous system. You might like to explore breath work, and I've had a great episode on breath work before. Maybe you just want to walk in nature, go outside, and even if you don't want to go for a big walk, just stand outside. And if you want to add some extra little bonus points, take your shoes off and put your feet on the ground. Just ground into that earth. Also, just doing something creative without there needing to be an outcome. Just simply do it because you enjoy it. So it's that whole finding the joy in being instead of always doing. And it's going from that whole I've got to complete a task to just being present. So you can explore activities that bring joy for the sake of joy. So just do some reading. Daydream. Oh my God, try daydreaming again. If you haven't done that for a while, just sit and daydream. What would you like to do? And because if it's something you haven't done for a while, it might take a little bit of practicing that muscle again. Go on to creative hobbies, watch the sunset. Just give yourself permission to be present without the need to justify it. And so remember, relaxing isn't a skill that you're going to master overnight, especially if it's something that you haven't done for a long time, but it's a practice. Do little steps. And this time of life is absolutely perfect to redefine what success and try that again, what success and fulfillment, oh, that's a hard one, look like beyond achievement. So I'll give you a little challenge. Just try one small act of being instead of doing, without guilt. Okay, the next question. Tanya writes, how do you decide what to say yes to and what to say no to at this stage of life? Wow, that's a good question, Tanya. And one, to be honest, I'm so much better at than I used to be, but I'm sure I could get even better. I mean, no one's perfect, hey? And I think that we always are going to be striving for better all the time. And I think midlife calls for far more intentional choices that we make, because midlife really shifts your priorities if you think about it, because often we find that once what we had was that felt important to us once upon a time, that might no longer align with how we're feeling now. And that's a whole realization that time and energy, they are your most valuable resources. You get to a point in your life where you go, I'm halfway through my life. I don't want to waste any more of it. Or I haven't got a lot of energy. What am I going to prioritize it on to save some? So just think about time and energy. They are your most valuable resources. And then that whole difference between saying yes out of an obligation versus a genuine desire. Because when I'm mentoring my ladies, I often do a gut check approach to decision making. And I think sometimes we don't use this as much as we should. So just a simple question to ask yourself, Does this feel like a full body yes or no? So, I mean, is it a hell yes or a hell no? You should be able to feel that within your body. It's a whole role of intuition. Just learn to trust your instincts instead of just all of those external expectations that we have in our life. And signs that something might be a should rather than a real hell yes, you feel resentment, you feel exhaustion, or you feel some dread. If you are feeling those things, take notice of it and ask yourself, what can you do about it? Do you really have to do it? And also, don't complain that you have to do something if you've had the opportunity to say no, or vice versa. Don't complain if you've had the opportunity to say yes to something that you really wanted to do. Because as women, we've got to get better at saying either a hell yes or a hell no. Because by always saying, and if we think about if we're a people pleaser and we love saying yes, another thing we do is that we train others around us to expect that. We're the ones who have created that boundary that we're complaining about. So think about it. If you're somebody who is a people pleaser and you say yes way too often, then there's a couple of things that you can do that can be really helpful. One thing that I encourage you to do is that pause method. Don't say yes immediately. Just give yourself that little bit of time to really check in to how you're feeling and what you want. It is okay to say no. And also just use gentle but firm responses because, if you don't want to say no, or you're saying yes out of an obligation that you feel like you're going to upset somebody if you say no, just try a simple phrase or a simple statement like, sounds great, but I don't have the capacity right now. That's pretty simple. It's not a big put down for them, but it's also honoring you and what you want. And also saying no to one thing means that you are going to say yes to something more aligned with you. So just think about, you don't really owe anyone an explanation for protecting your own time and energy. And your priorities are allowed to change and evolve. So what mattered even 5 years ago, what mattered last year, that doesn't have to matter now. So I'll give you a little challenge. Just practice saying no to something really small this week. Doesn't have to be major, just a small thing this week, and notice how it feels in your body. Okay, the next question comes from Anna, and she asks, what advice would you give your younger self about midlife? Whew, this is a big one. Okay, some big misconceptions that I had about midlife when I was younger. So they're the sorts of things like what I used to believe about aging, what I used to believe about what sort of purpose you would have when you're getting older, or what life would look like in my 40s and the 50s and beyond. And if you asked me even 5 years ago that I'd be the host of a podcast that was in the top 5% globally, that I'd be mentoring midlife women in midlife, that I wouldn't be in the classroom, that I'd be talking on stages and running workshops, to be honest with you, I would have thought that you were barking mad. So what I've learned is that there is so much more to you also than the roles you play. So think about, for many women, we've got roles of wife, of mother, of friend, of colleague, and sister. I think that in this stage of life, what I would share with you is that it really is a time of life where you can rediscover who you are now and redefine what you want. I mean, that's why I've called the podcast Redefining Midlife, because it's thinking about who you are now and who you want to be going forward. And you know what? If you're not sure what that might look like or what it could be for you, get some support from someone who can help you. It might be a friend. It could be a mentor like myself. In fact, I would love to help you, because my favorite thing to do is help women to do just that and to let them know that you're not too old to dream and create a life you want and deserve. Because in fact, you've got decades left of dreaming and living ahead of you. So one of the I suppose a little phrase that I love to say a lot is that you're not too old and it's not too late. And I think that should be almost like a mantra that we tell ourselves. We're not too old and it's not too late. And you know what? You don't have to have everything figured out to start something new, because sometimes the best things happen when you let go of the plan and just trust in the process. One of the other things that I think is really important that I would advise you to think about and is to prioritize your health, prioritize your joy and your passions. Don't wait for someday. And that book that I've often talk about, and I know I've talked about it on the podcast before, and it's certainly something that I bring up in any mentoring that I do with women, is Bronnie Ware's Top Regret of the Dying book. And the number one regret was, I wish I had the courage to live a life that was true to myself and not the one others expected of me. So if we think about that, I'll talk about two different topics from that. Firstly, challenge your absolutes. The I'm too old, who am I to do this, I can't, I always, I'll never stories. Challenge those assumptions and stories. Challenge your old beliefs because you can write yourself a new and more uplifting story. You're able to do that. And secondly, don't fall for the myth of prerequisites. You'll do something when you've got more time, when your kids leave home, or when I retire. And you know what? Maybe you can't take a big leap right now. Maybe life's preventing you from doing a big leap right now and a big change. But what's one small step that you could take? It doesn't have to be all or nothing. And another thing that can really help is, what would you tell a friend, a sister, or maybe a daughter if they were needing the same guidance that you are? Because often we know, we just don't act on it. Remember, it's never too late to rewrite your story, and it's never too late to create the life that you want. Now, I could go on, and I'm sure I'll think of plenty of other things that I'd add afterwards that I could have added to that, but I hope that helps you, Anna. And our final question comes from Liz. What's one myth about midlife that you wish more women would stop believing? Okay, this is a great one to end on. And I've had so many episodes and interviews on the podcast previously that feature this with so many real life examples of myth busting in action. So what I think are some of the biggest myths of midlife, and I wrote a couple down, the outdated belief that midlife is a crisis. You hear that whole, oh, it's a midlife crisis. Well, you know what? In reality, it's often an awakening. There's a whole fear-driven idea that, again, another myth, that it's too late to start, whether that be a new career, a new relationship, a change in your lifestyle, or maybe a passion of yours that you wanted to follow. And just remember that you don't have to have it all figured out. It's kind of as though you get to this stage of life and you have to, this is a final destination. You can't change from this point onwards. That's crap. You certainly can. Just look at this as a phase of continued growth. You are growing, and God willing, you'll be able to continue growing for decades to come. And remember that you've no control. You feel like you've got no control over your future. That's another myth, because there are some things that are beyond our control. We can't control what's happening in the world outside of us at the moment, but we can control the decisions that we make every single day. And we make countless decisions each and every day that determine our future. So if you think about just a simple way, or if we use health as an example, what you do today and the day after and the day after, and there are countless things that you will do in a day that contribute to your overall health, will impact your future. So, just don't think that you don't have any control over your future. You've got a lot of control. And I think being mindful and being intentional is so important. But we've got these myths because they come from our culture. There are so many narratives that portray, our stage of life, midlife, as a time of decline rather than possibility. And again, remember, this podcast is called Redefining Midlife. The whole way a woman's aging is framed differently than men's, let's be honest. We've got more focus on what we're losing rather than what we're evolving into something bigger and better. And if we think about our previous generations, they didn't always have that same opportunities for reinvention that we do today. And if you think to your mother, to your grandmother, they lived in an entirely different time. They were our role models and we learned off them. And they didn't have access to these ways of thinking and being that we do today. And I actually think that we owe it to them and to our daughters, to our nieces, and any younger women to challenge these old, outdated beliefs and create a whole new reality. and I've had lots of examples in the podcast before where I've talked about how I've rewritten my own midlife story, my own narrative. So for you, think about what that might be. It might be a number of things, or it might be one small thing. But just think about how stepping out of your comfort zone, whether it might be just through travel, like we talked earlier in the episode, or maybe a career shift, whether you leave a career altogether or you have a shift. Maybe it's going from full-time to part-time. There are lots of different things that we can think of there. Or maybe it's your own personal growth and development. All of these things that I've done personally, and that's me, travel, career, and really investing in my own personal growth, they have helped me see midlife completely differently. And my last 5 years really had been all about rewriting these narratives and challenging those limiting thoughts and beliefs that I had. So midlife isn't about shrinking. It's all about expanding. It's not about decline at all. We know that there are more women who are starting businesses. There are more women who are traveling, whether they travel in a group or solo. We know that women are finding new relationships in this stage of life as well, whether they be intimate relationships or just different friendships. And we know women are beginning to prioritize their well-being more than ever before. And that whole confidence that comes from knowing yourself better and caring less about what everybody else thinks, and that's pretty freeing. But make sure you act on it. Don't just talk about it. You're going to act on it. So that whole freedom to design a life that reflects who we are now, most of our mums never had that, but we've got it. You decide who you want to be in the future, not just who you've been. And I've had the absolute privilege to see women change before my eyes when they realize this. And it's what I support women to do in my mentoring spaces, especially those who do the Reimagine program. I see it. It's not as though you can't do it. I think also shift from that whole idea of fear to opportunity. So don't see change as a threat. Start to see it as a chance to create something new. That whole power of reframing your mindset. And just ask yourself, is it necessarily the end, or could this just be the beginning? And I've got a little exercise that I really would like you to do. And maybe you can journal, or maybe you can just think about it after this episode finishes. And the little question I've got for you is, if nothing was holding you back, what would you do differently today? So just think about that. And as I said, maybe journal on that one and see what comes up for you. I'll say the question again. If nothing was holding you back, what would you do differently today? So just think about the whole, I really encourage you to think about, you're not behind. You are exactly where you need to be. And just know that the next chapter of our life can be even better than the ones before. So let go of those, at least one, I challenge you, at least one outdated belief that you have about midlife this week, and take one small action that excites you. There's lots of things that you can do out of this episode today that I've given you. I've given you lots of examples, lots of challenges. So just think about what you might like to do today. And that wraps up the questions that we have. And thank you so much for joining me. And if you have a particular question that you'd like me to answer, just send a message to me on Instagram or email me at jo@joclarkcoaching.com. And until next week, stay well. Thanks so much for spending your time with me today. I hope you feel inspired to make the next chapter of your life the best one yet. And remember to share this episode with someone else who would love it, and connect with me on Instagram or LinkedIn at Jo Clark Coaching. All the links and the details from today's episode are in the show notes or at joclarkcoaching.com. And if you enjoyed this episode, please follow or subscribe this show on your favorite podcast app and leave a 5-star rating and review. This helps more midlife women find these empowering conversations. I can't wait to chat with you next week. Until then, take care and keep creating a life that you love.